from seeing what he needs to see to evaluate $250 million worth of business loans approved by Cabinet. The Premier is actually taking the province backwards by giving the Auditor General less access to confidential documents than his office has had in the past. So not only did this government, while in opposition, criticize the previous Conservative government for lack of transparency and accountability with the IEF, it seems they've actually made it less transparent and less accountable, and this is according to the Auditor General. And what we've seen the now Minister of Finance do was actually ensure that the Auditor General couldn't have access to these documents. In opposition, he was upset all the time. He was opposed to the IEF and how it was being handled. He said it was a slush fund, said it was, a lot of different things. But when of course he's in government, he brought in the new Auditor General's Act to Province House to ensure access to confidential Cabinet documents and files were protected by solicitor-client privilege. And the government, according to this article, Chronicle Herald, had denied more than 200 such documents to Auditor General during his attempt to audit the Industrial Expansion Fund and the Crown Corporation of NSPI. And this is, as I said before, a fundamental shift from where this party was in opposition. So my questions to the minister are, how, by having an arm's length group of individuals appointed by him or his cabinet, who isn't accountable to this House, who isn't accountable to the public, how does that make this IEF program more transparent and accountable to the people of Nova Scotia, especially in light of the fact that this government has actually proactively moved to keep information from the IEF out of the hands of the Auditor General? Of the Auditor General, whose job it is to ensure that the funds brought into government by taxpayers are being used in the way that they say they're supposed to be used. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Rural and Economic Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, through you, Mr. Chair, the member raises some things, I guess, that I will say that that I take issue with. And first and foremost, the Oversight Committee that was appointed by this government, those individuals who are 5, I've stood here in my place and I talked about the integrity of those individuals. For the record, I will reiterate that the integrity of those 5 individuals that represent the Oversight Committee, as far as I'm concerned, is beyond any sort of criticism. That they are honest volunteers who dedicate their time and their efforts to a state of fairness that, in the opinion, even when we were in opposition and certainly when we were in government, thought that was necessary. So I've got to say that and certainly stress that to the highest degree possible. And they would never, any one of them, would never compromise themselves in such a way as to either damage the reputation of themselves individually or of government or the province of Nova Scotia. And I want to make that, that very, very clear. I would be more than willing to, and I have, staked my individual reputation on that. Also, I think, for the record, I think it's important through you, Mr. Chair, that the member opposite know that, that it was this government. When I hear talk around the Attorney General, the Auditor General, and not having access to certain documentation, well, we have to be clear on this, that it was this government that came in and changed the act so that the Auditor General could have access to all that documentation. So, you know, I just hope, and I'm enjoying the dialogue, but I think it's important that if we are going to have good and productive and beneficial dialogue, and we can agree to disagree, but we also have to have the facts straight, right, correct, and accurate. And so it was this government that changed the act which would allow and permit the Auditor General to have the information that's required and requested and needed. It was also this government that recognized the lack of transparency, and lack of independence by the IEF. Hence, we appointed an oversight group, and on top of that, every transaction is up for public scrutiny, because through you, Mr. Chair, and I want the member to know this, is that all those transactions are as public as they can be. They're online. You can go online and look. Every year, we submit to the members of this House an annual report. That annual report breaks everything down. It's not like we've got something to hide. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We want every member in this House and every citizen in Nova Scotia has the right to see how their money through the IEF is being spent. We make that available in an annual report, and we will continue to do that. And I don't know how much more transparent we can be beyond that. And can you imagine, Mr. Chair, if somebody, or if the IEF, if they did something that I didn't like as minister, because a lot of this is putting some onus on me as minister. Can you imagine the outcry of these 5 well-respected individuals who take a backseat to no one? Can you imagine what their response would be if I came in and said, okay, you're all gone, you're out of here? It wouldn't happen. Common sense tells me that's not going to happen. I mean, I like to think that the reason that I, as minister, and all of us as MLAs, we take an oath. I took that oath seriously. And the thought, or even the hint or the suggestion that if something happened that didn't set well with me as far as this independent body is concerned, that there would be the wrath of somebody to pay, I think it's inappropriate, and I really don't think it's an area that we need to go into. And I have to say that, Mr. Chair, and again, if this is sticking up for those 5 well-respected individuals that sat on that group, so be it.
I recognize the member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be very clear, not once in this House or outside of this House did I question the integrity or the character of anybody in this government or anybody this government has appointed to any board. I have never done that, and I take exception to the fact that that position was put forward. This isn't about the characters around the table. This isn't about their integrity. I have all the faith in those individuals to do the job that they were assigned to do. And I have faith, the utmost faith in the members of the government and all MLAs in this House to uphold a quality character and act in the ways that they feel are best for Nova Scotians. I've never questioned anyone's intentions or anybody's character. But what this is about accountability. An arm's length group of people who do not present the business cases that come forward to the IEF to the public, to this House or to anybody else. Of course, we hear afterwards where the money went, but there's no scrutiny about how that money is being dished out. Those people, no matter how wonderful they are, and I'm sure they are, aren't accountable to the public. That's fact. They're not accountable to the public. They're not accountable to this House. They're not accountable to taxpayers. And that's what the issue is here. Putting this group of 5 together to oversee this doesn't change the fact that the public doesn't know what the business cases are for these millions of dollars that are being dished out annually, hundreds of millions of dollars being dished out annually by the IEF to various organizations across the province. We still don't know what the business cases are. And I know that I'm sure a lot of businesses have benefited from this money. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. I'm not saying the IEF has done bad things. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying there's a discrepancy in what this government said in opposition about the process and the transparency and accountability of the IEF and what their position is now. There seems to have been a fundamental shift. And when it comes to people being able to see the business cases for these companies that are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars, that hasn't happened. And that is why this caucus is still critiquing how the IEF is functioning. It has nothing to do with any of the personalities involved. Nothing whatsoever. It has to do with the process itself. And so what I'm wondering is why, in opposition, was this government so adamantly opposed to the process of the IEF, the level of transparency and accountability that it had, and now that it's in government, why is it taking a fundamentally different position? Why? The Auditor General still can't get in to see everything that's happening, everything he's wanted to see. He has said that according to the articles I've tabled, he said that's actually against the law in his opinion.
Yeah.
So my question is to the minister, why has the position of this government fundamentally changed from when it was in opposition to where it is now? And when can Nova Scotians actually expect to have an IEF that is completely transparent and accountable to the people that are elected in this House and to the people of Nova Scotia?
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I will say once again, the Act has been changed. I can't make it any clearer than that. The Act has been changed. Period. Can't be any more simpler. Mr. Chair, what I've also said, and I've already explained that when we were in opposition, we complained about some of the logistics around the IEF, around the transparency. I've already said that, but it seems like we're going around the mulberry bush now, because I've already responded to those, and for whatever reason or reasons, we keep coming back to the same questions, and I'm ready to move on. And when I hear the member raise issues about public scrutiny, well, I'm thinking to myself, well, is the member asking that every transaction that goes in front of the IEF should go public and let the public be involved in the decision-making process? And on the word, when I hear the word accountability, you know, let's not go back to that oversight panel. Do you know who's accountable, Mr. Chair? I'll tell you who's accountable. I'm accountable. Absolutely. I'm accountable. Cabinet's accountable. Government's accountable. I can't make it any simpler. So I don't know if my voice, I might be getting a little frustrated here because, and I'm not getting upset, but frustrated's the word, is because I've answered the questions, but for whatever reason, something simply put is not sinking in.
I recognize the member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to remind the House that every conversation that we have in here isn't personal. This is about an opposition trying to keep a government accountable based on our principles and values and what our desires are from our constituents. My job is to get up and ask questions. Ask questions until I believe they're answered. I don't feel that the questions have been answered in this case, because I've asked why this government had a fundamentally different position in opposition as they do now in the IEF. That question hasn't been answered to a level that's satisfactory to me. I'm still not sure what changes in the Act that the Minister mentioned have made this program, the IEF, more accountable to taxpayers. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen those details, so that's why I've asked it again. And I'm still not sure how an arm's length group of people are accountable and who they're accountable to. Those were simple questions that were asked, and I haven't gotten simple answers. But that said, Mr. Chair, I have very much appreciated my dialogue with the Minister over the course of these last number of hours. As he knows, I do respect him, and I respect the folks in his office that work for him and on behalf of the taxpayers across the province.
Thank you.
And I feel that this conversation has been very helpful in bringing to light a number of concerns that I've had as an opposition critic. And I hope it's been helpful to the Minister as well to hear what the concerns are from the opposition, and to do it in a way that's not just the back and forth style of question period. I find that this exercise has been very helpful to me because we've been able to be a little bit more substantial about some of the things that we talk about. And I hope in passing the time over to one of my colleagues, Mr. Chair, that that we can recognize that this conversation has hopefully been helpful to those on the government side as well. And with that, I will hand it over to member from Preston. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have just a few questions for the Minister regarding around tourism. And the Minister may not be aware, but some time ago I spent a lot of time in the riding of the Eastern Shore trying to promote tourism in that area. And the tourism numbers, as the Minister is probably well aware, are very dismal in my riding and the Eastern Shore, which actually makes up the whole area. And for a long time, it was the worst tourism record in the whole province, with their annual growth in single digits. And for a while, we had worked very hard on it and managed to get double-digit growth, still not where it should be, but again, double-digit growth. And then when the Conservative government took over, they took a change in path, and the numbers dropped to single-digit growth again. Now, I know the Minister knows the importance of tourism and the economic benefit from tourism in the area. He's spoken about that before when I've talked to him about it. And I just, a few questions I want to ask around the Anakin Eastern Shore Tourism Association. I'd like to know how much the province funds them annually in their budget.
I recognize the Honourable Minister. I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, you have to excuse me sometimes when we go from, even though we're all one department, with the realignment and tourism has to join in, NSBI and the Crown Agency, so it takes some time. We're just switching some chairs around here. Through you, Mr. Chair, the member is absolutely correct when it comes to tourism and it being a large industry in the province of Nova Scotia, and that we also recognize, or at least I recognize, I've had a number of conversations in the past, since I've been minister, in the past 2 years, with that Eastern Shore, that whole Eastern Shore dynamic in Antigonish, and we have tourism associations there, as we do in every region of the province. So there's been some dialogue. There's been some requests. Tourism in general, right across the province, in some regions, although it's up overall, there are some regions in the province that have benefited. And the question about money is, I can't tell you right off the top of my head, but certainly I will commit to finding out that number, and certainly willing to table it. And while I'm at it, it just reminds me of something else, because one of the things that I committed to do when with the member of Yarmouth, and I think the member of West Hants, and I hope it's acceptable for me to do that, but since we are now back to tourism, is that I was asked to table, or at least I think I committed to table some information, some data with respect to visitations by origin, and by, in other words, where they came from, and also some tourism indicators. And for the benefit of the chair, I would certainly like to table that now. I will endeavor to find out what the exact number is, and that shouldn't take all that long to, it's at the end, it's 4:22 now, so so sometime tomorrow I should be able to provide that information.
I recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the answer from the minister, and I understand that it's difficult to know all the answers to all these questions. It's a lot of activities that you supervise as minister. When you get that information, could I get it for the past, probably the past 8 or 10 years? I want to see if there's any trends in funding, and also a breakdown of where the money is supposed to be spent and the rules around the spending of the money that's given to AESTA, to ensure that the information is correct. Could I get a commitment for that, please?
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And my response is we will provide that data, and I suspect that we would have available for the last 8 to 10 years, and the member can do his individual analysis or whatever.
I recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the reasons I'm asking for this funding is because, as I said earlier, and the minister and I have talked about this before, is the tourism numbers are really low in that area, and I've never been able to get a handle on exactly how much money has went into AESTA to actually create those I'll be polite, very poor tourism numbers. There didn't seem to be a plan in the past by their board. I believe is a very, very good board they have with the ESTA, but I don't believe that the approach that was taken for the tourism development in that area, I don't believe the department was getting a really good return on your investment. And I would ask also to the minister to review that and see if indeed, when he does review the numbers and he provides them to us, if the staff could have a look at that and just see, based on the actual percentage of tourism in the province and the midnight stayed in that area, for the dollars that were invested in that particular organization, it just doesn't seem that the investment was a good, wise investment. And I know this has been going on a long time, and it was there when we were in government, it was there before we got to government, it was there after we left government and the PC party took over, and now with the NDP there. And I would like to get that information and to review all that, because I think it's an important issue that needs to be addressed. I know the staff in the tourism department work very, very hard to ensure that we have the best tourism we possibly can in this province. But this is one area that I'm very, very concerned about. There's no other area in the province that does so poorly in tourism, but yet has money continually poured into that organization every year and doesn't seem to get very many results. So could I just ask the minister for some comments on those, please?
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I welcome the opportunity to make a few comments. I think it's I do have some information just for last year, and it's interesting to know that when we talk about overnight stays, is that on a provincial level, it was pretty well a flat line. And interesting enough, it was up 2% in the Eastern Shore, and I found that somewhat interesting. I think it's important for me to mention, Mr. Chair, that certainly the MLAs responsible for further along the Eastern Shore, as we go up towards Antigonish, and certainly when we get into Guysborough County, is that I know that MLA for part of the Eastern Shore, I met with him at great length. Myself and staff went on a tour. I met with the tourism associations there early in my tenure. I've had a couple meetings with them. I've recognized, I've seen some things in the area that, and trust me, I'm not an expert. I rely upon staff to make the recommendations, but I seen some things that I thought certainly had some potential, and I know that I've mentioned some things that maybe possibly could be done. And there's I know there's one initiative going on that my ministerial assistant is playing a very lead role in and developing something around the there's a little bit of a little sense of humor going on in the house this afternoon. Yeah, so I know with the able assistance of my ministerial assistants playing a lead role, where we're looking at some things along with the Department of Natural Resources as to what we may be able to do in the area to increase the tourism. And for the member opposite, through you, Mr. Chair, that it is a legitimate concern, but I've got to say this, is that tourism in general all over the province is a concern to me, and we will work individually and collectively and with everyone to see what we can do about boosting those numbers. So we are aware of it. We've looked at it. I've looked at it personally. There's been ongoing dialogue, and let's keep our fingers crossed for the whole province to get those numbers up there.
I recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the minister's interest in this very important topic and his interaction in the community. I've heard some very positive things from people within my community that you've met with on an occasion, and at least one occasion they were quite pleased that you took the time and sit down and talk to them about their concerns. The issue with tourism all over, aside from the Eastern Shore area, Antigonish Eastern Shore area, it, like you say, is flatlined. What kind of plan do you have in the future to try to improve that? I realize the Canadian dollar is high, so that means our biggest customer to the south is probably not going to travel here. They've got a bad economy. The truth is, the matter with the Yarmouth Ferry has definitely caused some problems for tourism. I've heard that in my own area, where people that did live in the U.S. or planned to go across the ferry last year and this year had previous bookings called and canceled them because the ferry wasn't there. And the overall economy in Nova Scotia and the rest of the country has limited some travel by some people, and indeed it doesn't take many people to decide not to go to a destination to do it. So what plans do you have in place to try to counteract this and to get more dollars spent on tourism here in Nova Scotia?
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I get a little, I guess, a little excited, a little ramped up when I heard that question, because actually there are a lot of things, and I know as over the next minute or so, as I go through some of those things, I know there are going to be some things that I'm going to miss. What we are doing is that, well, I think one of the many things that we are doing is when I consider the activity around the Bay of Fundy. The Bay of Fundy is one of the 7 wonders, and certainly the tourism has played a very prominent and lead role in exercising that. And I would say that for every member of the House, if you haven't done so yet, it's 77077, text Fundy, and that's all. And you can do that as many times as you want, and it's 77077. So that's one of the ways that we are promoting Nova Scotia. And if we are fortunate enough to get that to win that and become one of the 7 wonders, I think that'll do. That'll do wonders for our tourism industry in the province of Nova Scotia. So that's one thing. We've also we've broadened the campaign of the My Nova Scotia campaign, and that's a campaign I think that's very, very familiar now. I think, and I'm going to give a number. I always hesitate to give numbers because mentally I can only hold so many, but we have 88% of the tours that come to Nova Scotia come from Canada, and so we also got a large population of that number come from Atlantic Canada. So the My Nova Scotia campaign, which we've built on from last year, and I trust we will build on again in preceding years, but that's built to attract more people to the province of Nova Scotia. I look at one of the things that I said even 2 years ago, and it's taken us a while, but we are getting there, that we've got to look also in the area of tourism around niche marketing. And by that, I simply mean we are reaching out more to other targets that we haven't done before, non-traditional targets. And one of those targets is African Americans. We've got a huge market to the south of us that we haven't tapped into yet, that are now through Roots to Roots, that campaign, we have not only African Americans, but individuals of French descent from the Acadian that are now able to trace their roots to Nova Scotia, make those connections. We do advertisements, we do magazine advertisements, we do newspaper advertisements, not only south of the border, but also in the United Kingdom, in Germany. We do trade missions. We are constantly looking at trade missions where we can promote Nova Scotia in the tourism industry to all of to the world, to that global market. We are doing so much. You know, when I think about the niche marketing, it was last year that we even through at the national level, through the First Ministers, provincial and territorial ministers, that we even started to look at Mexico and in China. And this is part of the national initiative. So we are now working more closely with tourism at a federal level than we've ever done in the past. So we've got a number of things that are on the go, all going on at the same time. And one of the problems that we have is that globally, when it comes to tourism, there's so many of us competing for the same market, competing for the same dollars. One of the things that we recognize, certainly in Nova Scotia, is some of those markets that we'd like to get into, we don't want to put the cart before the horse. And I say that because before some of those markets that we'd like to get into, we have to make sure that we've got the air transportation so that people that want to come here can access us. I think we've got a real opportunity in the future because there are jurisdictions around overseas that would love to come to Nova Scotia because of what we offer. And we offer things collectively that as far as I'm concerned, are unparalleled anywhere in the world. When, you know, we may knock our weather, but our weather during the summer is a nice temperature. We have individuals that want to travel from their homes because the summers are too hot. You know, whether it be in India or Saudi Arabia or any of those countries, and a lot of these jurisdictions that we talk about are countries that have money that can afford to travel. One of the problems we have, though, is around getting here. So there are all sorts of ways and initiatives that we are pursuing to attract people to Nova Scotia, and we will continue to look at new ways. The African Diaspora Trail. I think hosting that conference in September, where we will be exposed globally. Everybody will focus on us, and the fact that this is the International Year for persons of African descent around the world, and the things that we are doing. We've partnered with the Mi'kmaq community on initiatives We had an event last year for the first time here in Halifax. That was the lead was certainly the Mi'kmaq community of Nova Scotia. It was a huge success. So it's things like that, some things that we are doing for the first time that are bringing results to the province of Nova Scotia. We got to continue to build on those, create new markets for ourselves, and just go, go, go. So those are just some of the ways that we're trying to improve the tourism in the province.
I recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just switching back for a second to the ASTA funding that you committed to provide for me. I think I neglected to ask for a copy of the agreement that the province has with ASTA to provide that service on behalf of the province, or however the funding or however it's structured. If I get a copy of that agreement that's signed between the province and ASTA.
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, through you, I just received some information with respect to numbers, and as opposed to me writing those numbers down now with respect to the Eastern Shore, what I'd rather do, instead of putting something on in my own handwriting, is I'd like to get something a little bit more that's going to be a little bit more legible, if that's going to be acceptable to the member opposite. And also, and I think the question was around some type of written agreement, written partnership, and yes, okay, and certainly I'd be more than willing to provide whatever is available, Mr. Chair.
I recognize the member for Preston.
I'd like to, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the Minister for that, and I look forward to getting the information. And the other thing that, one other thing I want to talk about here, among many things, is I understand that there's a reorganization in the province underway of the tourism associations in Nova Scotia to make them more streamlined and work better. And I don't know if that's an initiative of the department, or if the organizations themselves have come together and said, let's work together to provide a more directed operation towards promoting tourism, the work that they do towards promoting tourism. So I would like to know what the Minister knows about that reorganization and what the parameters that have been set by the department for that to happen, and how far along. Well, maybe let's just go from there, and then I'll ask further questions.
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in response, we don't drive that. We look towards the RITAs to come up with certain efficiencies on how things are going to be run. We do encourage. We encourage them. We meet with them on a pretty consistent basis. We are there to be very, very supportive of the RITAs, but we leave a lot of the work. They're the experts in their area. We don't try to come in and be the be the driver, sort of. We don't play that lead role. They generally come to us with strategies, whether those strategies be around events or whatever, and also with respect to efficiencies when it comes to tourism. So we take them very, very seriously, and we consider them as one of our partners.
I recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, I realize that there's a reorganization in place of the tourism organizations within the province, and your staff would be aware of this happening. And I would like to know what areas of the province have been reorganized and what areas yet have to be reorganized, whether it's driven by the department or driven by industry. But your staff would know this information inside out and backwards.
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, we don't drive this, but there are a couple of regions in Nova Scotia that are, I guess, that are reorganizing themselves, and certainly in the southwest Nova Scotia, in the Yarmouth area, it's already a pretty well done deal with respect to the Yarmouth Evangeline Trail and the Lighthouse routes have combined, and they now are known as Destination Southwest Nova Scotia. So that's a change, and also along the eastern shore and Pictou County have been working together with respect to a reorg as well. And I think they're still in the process. I don't think, yeah, they're still in the process, and nothing has been finalized yet. I've got to say this, is that I've also have received some correspondence, and I might have mentioned this earlier, Madam Chair, to the member, that the Eastern Shore, the Antigonish, there has been some dialogue with me in the way of correspondence about what the future looks like. There's nothing definite there yet. It's still, I guess, it's still a work in progress.
The honourable member from Preston.
I understand that that your department isn't driving this, and that's fair enough, but the department does fund these organizations, and unless they meet the criteria for the department, they won't get funding. In this process in the Antigonish and Pictou area and Eastern Shore, when that's all coming together, how far along is that process, and has every tourism association been involved in this process?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I respect the questions that are being asked, and I've been very careful in delivering my responses, my answer, because I don't think I want to speak for any one particular organization. I don't mind talking about tourism in general, but you're talking about organizations that do exist. They are a body, and I don't think I'm the designated speaker for those organizations. I can say this, and I've already said this, is that yes, there are some organizations around the province that have amalgamated service. I don't have a problem with which I've already mentioned who those are. I don't know at what stage during that work in progress that some of the other organizations are at, and I think it would be inappropriate on my part to speak for those organizations. And I hope through you, Madam Chair, that the member can appreciate that.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Yeah, I can, Mr. Minister, I can appreciate that. Really, the information I was hoping that is to ensure that the process goes through, and I know that the Department of Tourism, sort of on the sidelines, is working with the organizations. And I just want to be sure that all the organizations that are out there in tourism have an opportunity to participate in this amalgamation. I don't think the amalgamation is a bad thing. It's probably going to be a good thing when it's all done. And if your department is doing anything to encourage that, I think that is positive. But I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to voice their opinions on this and participate in it. So when it's all finished, that everybody will work together and indeed help improve our tourism in our province, which we so desperately need for employment, especially in our rural areas.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I can say with all sincerity that certainly for those associations and for the department is the cause is the same, and that is to improve tourism and throughout all regions of the province of Nova Scotia, and that we will continue to work with them and cooperate with them, and we pretty well take our lead from them, and we will continue to be at the table with them, and I don't see that either decreasing at any level, and their interest is our interest, and we're working towards the same goal. So I hope you feel confident with that.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
I am sure I am confident with that. That's not the issue. The issue I really wanted to be sure of is, and I have a great deal of faith in the staff in your department and the work that they do, is to be sure that all the tourism associations within the province, when this new process is taking place or as it takes place, that they have an opportunity to meet with those groups and all the groups come together. So at the end of the day, they're all working together for a change, because in the past that always didn't happen, and because it didn't happen, it really left a void in many areas. So I just really want to make sure that, and I know the department has the same goal, I just want to make sure that the department is encouraging these organizations to work together, and I'd just like to get the comment from the minister to know that that's the direction that the department is going in. I want it for reassurance as much as anything.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I could give a very, very short one-word answer to the member's question, and I will, and maybe I'll just piggyback on that one word, but absolutely is that that we are, and I'll elaborate a little bit, is that we look at this with these collaborations, and if you look at the whole of economic and rural development and tourism. One of the things that when I came into the department is I've recognized, because we work with municipalities, we work with tourism associations, and the first thing that comes to my mind, Madam Chair, something I'm sure that the member would be very aware of, is with respect to RDAs. And so that theme of the municipalities working together is a common theme throughout all that we do with respect to the department. And I'm looking at and I'm throwing tourism in there as part of the department. And so the short answer is absolutely and we actually try to, I guess in our own unique ways, try to inspire, encourage, and at every opportunity embellish, collaborate, enhance that whole idea of partnershiping and working together, that there's strength in numbers, as I always say, so it's important that make sure everybody's on the same page. One of the things that I know that the RDAs, and I use them as an example because the RDAs in their wisdom wanted to make sure that there was some consistency with what it is that they do. And so they've tried to ensure that if any municipality of the RDA got upset, that they wanted to put something in place so that dialogue would continue and that nobody would ever leave the table.
The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have left?
You have approximately 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. I just want to thank the minister for his answers. I'm going to come back with some more questions, but my further questions will be in economic development rather than tourism, so you can be prepared for that when I get a chance, if I get a chance to speak again. Thank you.
I now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd just like to make a few observations and ask a few questions of the minister regarding the situation that's presently exists in the CBRM, Cape Breton Regional Municipality. Mr. Minister, when you came to office, the unemployment rate in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality was around 14%. Today, it's 18%, and those are Stats Canada statistics, not mine. I guess I could start by asking you, how do you account for that?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. And we are making a few changes here with respect to staff. How do I account for that? Well, I would explain it this way: is that everybody is well aware that, and I've often used the term in the House, Madam Chair, tough times, that all over Nova Scotia is that we've experienced that there's been a recession that has hit us globally. We were not an exception to that. We've, as we all know, we've lost some jobs in Nova Scotia. In the same breath, we've gained some jobs. On the whole, have we done as good and maybe in some cases better than other jurisdictions? Well, I'd like to think that we did. But through any recession, there's going to be job loss, and I don't think anyone in this House looks upon job loss as something that's welcome. I think it's something that I and this government has taken very, very seriously, and I know certainly our Crown agencies has as well. You know, we are. It's a tough world. The world has changed. the way we do things now in the world of employment are so different than what they were. It's a global market, and I would say that. Did we lose a step, or were we a little slow getting out of the starting blocks when it comes to the global economy? Well, I think maybe we were. So that's the job. Things have changed. So with that change have come some job losses.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That's interesting that the minister would talk about a recession that he obviously feels is happening here in Nova Scotia at the present time. That's just what he said. That sentiment is certainly not shared by the Premier and the Finance Minister. So the minister must know something that they don't know about the economy in Nova Scotia, because on the one hand, Madam Chair, he's saying that the economy is in the tank, and his Premier and the Finance Minister and other ministers who have been talking in this House are of the opposite view. Now, the facts are that I'm not talking to the minister, Madam Chair, about globally in Nova Scotia. I'm talking about the Cape Breton Regional Municipality has an unacceptable unemployment rate of 18%. And my question to the minister was, what is he? How did he account for that, or what is he? And my further question would be to him, and when I put it to him, is that today in Nova Scotia, we have the Department of Economic Development. We have the Industrial Expansion Fund, we have NSPI, and we have the RDAs. And perhaps there are some others out there giving out money, but all of these collectively have not been able to solve the problem of unemployment in Cape Breton. The problem that I have with where we're going here is that we seem to be top-heavy in the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, with salaries, with staff, with huge bureaucracies in that department. But the money that they're spending, Madam Chair, is not getting out there in terms of jobs on the ground. And again, I'm talking about my area, Cape Breton Regional Municipality. I would like to know from the minister if he can give me some figures as to the funded staff of the Department of Economic Development, and also the what the mandate is for the Department of Economic Development as a department in terms of creating jobs in the province. And when you do that, Mr. Minister, I'll ask you or your people to look up also the funded staff of the Industrial Expansion Fund in Nova Scotia and how much money they're giving out to create jobs in Nova Scotia. And while you're at it, Mr. Minister, your people or yourself, you may have this information. I'd like to know the funded staff of Nova Scotia Business Inc. and how much money they're giving out to Nova Scotia, to Nova Scotians for business purposes. And last year, and finally, then I'll let you take over, Mr. Minister. Last year, I made the comment in this House that in regards to NSPI, there were 11 executives at that corporation that were making over $100,000 a year in that one department. And there was a funded staff of somewhere around 75. And they were giving out, I believe at that time, around $15 million a year, and their total administrative budget, I believe, was up around $6 to $7 million. I'm not sure the exact figure. Disproportionate to the amount of money that NSPI were giving out in Nova Scotia. And precious little of it, by the way, into Cape Breton. So maybe the minister can, if he has that information, he certainly, if he doesn't, he certainly should have. And if he doesn't, if he can't give it to me. And the last thing is, would the minister make an observation about the salary of the CEO of NSBI? That is, he's the largest paid employee of the government, of the taxpayers of Nova Scotia, even though sometimes I feel that entity doesn't believe it's responsible to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. How much the CEO is making, and including expenses, and also, Mr. Minister, whether or not the CEO of NSBI and his executives are responsible to you, Mr. Minister, or to the Deputy Minister, or to their board.
He's going back and forth. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to clarify some things, and I don't want someone to put words in my mouth of things that I didn't say, and I don't ever recall using the word in the tank. What I do recall is that what I said was tough times, is that what I said, do you know what, Madam Chair, I didn't interrupt him when he was up.
Order,
and I wish
please.
He would.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister has the floor.
You heard me?
Order.
Yep.
Order, please. Order. The Honourable Minister has the floor. Both of you, please. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
I think I've just been threatened. I think I've just been threatened.
Order, please. Perhaps the Minister can take a seat, please. I'll just take a moment and confer with the clerk here, please, on procedural meeting. Thank you. I would ask that all members remember that parliamentary decorum is of the utmost importance here in the chamber, and speaking with threatening tones or asking each other to shut up, although I understand that emotions can get the best of you at times. This is an opportunity for dialogue. It's an opportunity for comments, and I would ask that each respect the other in the chamber. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, what I have here, and I took a little bit of time for staff to come down for NSBI, and because there's so many units involved with economic and rural development and tourism, so forgive me for the time delay. There were a number of questions that I wrote down, And I guess the first one was around FTEs for economic and rural development and tourism, which is 256. And for the IEF, Madam Chair, we have 6 FTEs. NSBI FTEs are in the range of 75 employees. And with respect to the salary paid for the president of NSBI, and my recollection is, and I think it's a pretty good one, it's $220,000. And I might add that was a contract certainly that when we came into government that was already in existence. It was a 5-year contract. I've got to say, and again with respect to NSBI, is that it's my opinion, and certainly the opinion of government, that they perform a very valuable task for the province of Nova Scotia. They're the arm of the province of Nova Scotia that does those things when it comes to foreign investments in the way of job opportunities and getting businesses to come to Nova Scotia. They also play a role, I guess, more regionally when it comes to the job retention. So they are a valuable resource for the province of Nova Scotia. And I would say, Madam Chair, it's certainly my opinion that we are a better province as a result of their activities.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So what the minister is saying is that 4 agencies in Nova Scotia employing, well, with the 4 of them, the RDAs, over 400 people, are involved in economic development in Nova Scotia, and I return again to my statement that the unemployment rate in Cape Breton is an unacceptably high 18%. So if that's performance, I would hate to see what would happen in Nova Scotia if we didn't have 400 people involved in economic development and the RDAs, and also the other 2 agencies I talked about, the Industrial Expansion Fund and economic development itself. I asked the question about the salary. If his memory serves him right, like he said, that perhaps it was $220,000. I believe it was $260,000 last year with some expenses. But more importantly, another question I asked is that, 10 others in that department are making over $100,000 a year. And it begs the question, are we getting value for the taxpayer's dollar here? We're paying out huge sums of money to these people. They're not accountable to anybody, apparently. They're not, their estimates, the CEO doesn't come here and answer questions. He's probably making more than the deputy minister is of that particular department. Who's responsible overall? Is it the deputy, or is it the president of NSBI? Also, and I believe those are legitimate questions, because I'd like to know, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, where we're going in Cape Breton, and I'm concerned about Cape Breton because the initiatives that have taken place in Cape Breton so far regarding the number of jobs in Cape Breton that we need down there to get that unemployment rate down. And it shouldn't be hard to do, because the Premier and the Finance Minister have been talking about what a wonderful place Nova Scotia is, and that there's all kinds of opportunities here, and we're going in the right direction. Well, I beg to differ. Cape Breton is going in the other direction in terms of unemployment. And the one stable that we've had down there over the past few years is starting to crumble. And Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, that's call centers. I would like to know from the Minister what plans his department have to provide jobs to take the place of call centers, jobs that are being lost in Cape Breton. And I'll bring it to the Minister's attention. He may not know this, But one of the major call centers at one time had 900 people working for it in Cape Breton. It's now down below 400 and projected to go down. We've lost 500 jobs in that one industry alone in the last number of months. That industry was brought in on payroll rebate system. There's other call centers in the area that are rethinking their position in Cape Breton because of the Canadian dollar, because of what's been happening in technology in the world of call centers. And that you can't blame on the government, but what you can blame, if the government doesn't have a strategy to get those numbers down that are surely going to go higher as we lose jobs in Cape Breton, then I just wonder if the minister is aware of the problem down there, and if he is, what strategy does your department have to get that number of 18% unemployment that's surely going to rise if something is not done, because we're losing call center jobs. What's the strategy of the minister in doing something about the unacceptable high unemployment in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, a couple of things that were mentioned and come to my attention. The first thing is that, because this is part of the answer to the question that's being asked, is the president of NSBI is actually out of the province, I spent some time with him yesterday, along with the board of the NSBI. He's out of the province and he's doing what he should be doing. He's out of the country, trying to secure more business for the province of Nova Scotia. And Madam Chair, I know that the salary that the president of NSBI has, that's one thing, that $220,000. You know, someone obviously thought that was worth the investment, and Madam Chair, his expenses are not part of his salary. That's his expenses that's used up in his travel. With respect to contact centers, is that there have been questions on the floor of the House, Madam Chair, around contact centers. And I know I've got up a number of times and responded to contact centers. And again, I'm going to reiterate, times have changed. What worked well for contact centers 10 and 15 and 20 years ago doesn't work so well now. But I also, in the same breath, Madam Chair, I recognize the value in those jobs, because those jobs currently in the province of Nova Scotia, there's about 14,000 people that are employed in contact centers, and most of those are in rural Nova Scotia. Are those important jobs? Well, I think they are. What we do when we see companies in trouble, or we're aware of companies in trouble, is with the able assistance of the minister responsible for labour and advanced education, is we go in there and we work with the companies, with both the employer and the employee, because what we try to do is we provide strategies. Also, what I want to mention is when we talk about what are we doing for the future, and jobs here is part of the future, because what we are doing is we want to, and I've said this earlier today, it's about investing in people, investing in one of the greatest resources that we have, and that's our human resource, so that people that are currently employed, that we can work with them, invest in them, so that they can learn better skills, so that they can become better educated, so that they can be looking towards the future, so that we have many employees around the province of Nova Scotia that lack some things in the way of skills, training / education. So through jobs here, we are attempting to address that. We recognize that as an issue and as a concern. So we are working on that, Madam Chair. So we know that we recognize that times have changed. And I've already mentioned this, that, yeah, we might have been a little slow, the province of Nova Scotia, getting away from the starting blocks, but we realized when we came into government, that the way we do business in Nova Scotia has not kept pace with what's going on globally. So we are trying to address that, Madam Chair.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Listening with great interest to the minister. And, I'm not really interested if the CEO of NSBI is out of the country. I'd like to know, maybe taxpayers would like to know where he's at. But anyway, that he's out of the country, that's fine. What I wanted to know is that, will the minister assure, and I asked him this question last year, that the president and CEO of NSBI sits next to the minister during his estimates and answers questions directly through the minister on his department. And that didn't happen last year, and it's not happening this year. And that's a pretty substantial budget. And the minister talking about the future in Nova Scotia, that they're working towards solving a problem in the future. And you know what? I'm sure that the 18% unemployed in Cape Breton would take great solace in that fact that somewhere down the road there's going to be an economic boom in Cape Breton. Well, I've been waiting for a while for that. And we have at least 400 people working, supposedly working towards that end to improve the economy in Nova Scotia, Madam Chair. And the economy, I say again, the unemployment rate is going up in Cape Breton, not going down. And as we speak, we are losing jobs in the one stable industry that's providing a huge amount of jobs down there, other than government jobs like the hospital and the university and others, and public sector jobs. The economy is not doing well, and something has to be done about that. And I asked about the strategy, because obviously with the number of people that the minister employs in his department through all these agencies I'm talking about, including the RDAs and NSBI and the Industrial Expansion Fund and Economic Development as its own entity, surely somebody in that parade of entities that I just talked about is talking about a strategy. Surely somebody is, about the future of industrial Cape Breton, or what's known now as the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, and its high unemployment numbers. Way too high in this day and age. And when you hear the Premier talking about the good things that are happening in Nova Scotia, and the Finance Minister is saying that everything is wonderful, and yet the Minister of Economic Development is saying we're in a recession. So, what are we supposed to take from that, except to say that the problem is now, Mr. Minister, the problem is now, and I'd like to know what your strategy is to take, and you mentioned call centers. Call centers are good jobs, but you can't live on them. You can't live on, I reject the premise that anybody in Nova Scotia can live on $11 or $12 an hour. There has to be a long-term strategy. They're great second jobs, and they're great jobs as a buffer towards something else. But they're not. They're the working poor. That's what they are. And they're working in these conditions for very little money. And those call centers, most of them are there because they're getting a provincial rebate on salaries. That's the only reason they're there. And even that is not good enough now because of the Canadian dollar and the way the economy is going and the way the technology is changing in the entire call center industry. So they were good, and I applaud the call centers for providing jobs in Cape Breton, but the jobs are starting to move away. Substantial jobs, Mr. Minister, in the last number of months, Madam Chair. And, one call center, the largest one down there, is on the verge of closing. Very quietly, I haven't heard much from the government on it, but very quietly they're laying off people, and it's becoming a concern for us in Cape Breton. What I'm saying, Mr. Minister, with the huge bureaucracy that you do have, with the kind of intellectual resources that you have in your department, with the number of people that are making six-figure salaries, surely to heaven somebody can figure out a strategy that's going to reduce the unemployment numbers in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. This day and age, it's not satisfactory that the unemployment rate is 18% and rising. I'd like to know, Mr. Minister, how you're going to address that.
Before I recognize the minister, again, I would remind the member that the questions would be better directed through me to the minister, and likewise the comments back. Just want to keep things at a reasonable tone here. Thank you very much. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, and with respect to the strategy, I've already mentioned, and I'll mention again, the Jobs Here strategy. One of the things that we did with respect to Jobs Here is Jobs Here is applicable to every region in the province of Nova Scotia. We purposely did that so that it would be inclusive, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the Jobs Here strategy talks about training and education in the workplace. It talks about productivity, increasing the productivity for those companies that exist here so that those companies can be more competitive in a global market, Madam Chair. Jobs Here certainly recognizes where we have to go in order for not only for us to be more sustainable, but for us to build for the future. And, you know, we recognized as soon as we got in, well, even before we got in government, that things had changed. And so when we did come into power, one of the very, very first things we did, besides looking at the realignment of economic and rural development and tourism, culture, and heritage for the good things, so that we could be better positioned, so that when I hear things about what are we doing, well, the president from NSBI, Madam Chair, was here for a couple of days, waiting to be called, but work called him out of the country. So he's doing what he's been paid, and what he's getting paid to do is to get people more interested in Nova Scotia, to help us and assist this province in putting Nova Scotia on the global map. We've already talked about this at some length today, is in order for us to compete, in order for us to be competitive, well, we have to be at the table. And the president, along with the RDAs and along with field staff from NSBI, along with good staff from economic and rural development and tourism, that's all part of what they do, is so that we can improve the circumstances for Nova Scotians, create more and better opportunities in every region of the province, Madam Speaker. Jobs Here is about that. And we will continue with that strategy because we know it is the future of tomorrow.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, I repeat, I'm not interested where the CEO of the NSBI is at these days. I'm interested in the general accountability of that particular part of economic development to the public. I'm concerned that that particular part of economic development, Madam Chair, is being treated as a private business, but there's one difference. It's the taxpayers that are funding NSBI. It's not a private sector entity, it's a government entity. They can call it whatever they want. They can call him the president and CEO, they can call him whatever they want. I'm saying that he's responsible to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. And by the way, I think he's a pretty good executive. I'm not saying he isn't, but I'm saying that Nova Scotians have a right to know whether we're getting value for money from NSBI. I mean, the amount of money that's being spent on salaries versus the amount of money that they're distributing in this province, and the success and failure rate, I believe, Madam Chair, of that NSBI corporation has to be evaluated. And the way it could be evaluated, if we could ask some direct questions of those, instead of getting a lecture from the minister about the problems in trying to grow the economy. And the minister, I believe, made reference to the number of jobs going forward that they're going to be created in Nova Scotia, 22 to 2,500. And before I sit down, Madam Chair, I would ask the minister how many of those jobs are going to be in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, and when could we expect those jobs? Also, the Cape Breton Regional Municipality is concerned, and by the way, you talk about, Madam Chair, talk about contracts. He said last year, and he's saying again this year, that NSBI have a 5-year contract. Now, or the president of NSBI. Now, I'm wondering why he's bringing that up last year, or why he's bringing it up this year. Is it because he's uncomfortable with the way that things are happening with NSBI, Madam Chair, or with his whole fiefdom over there with 4 different entities involved in the one department and hundreds of civil service people trying to get the economy kick-started in Nova Scotia? Because if that's the case, and he's concerned about it, and the government wants to do something about it, they have the avenue to do something about it. They could shift direction there and perhaps make a deal with the president and CEO or that whole department to move on. It's not something that hasn't been done before. You know, they didn't have any problem getting rid of the chief clerk in the Speaker's office, for example, when it was to their advantage to do so. He had a contract too, but that was done away with in a heartbeat. You know, all it took was the right incentive. You know, Madam Chair, so what I'm saying is, I would hope the minister is not trying to defend the reason why they're keeping all of these things together. The Industrial Expansion Fund is separate, Economic Development is separate, NSBI is separate, the RDAs are separate, and anybody tell me that the RDAs these days are being successful, you know, in kickstarting the economy of this province is dreamy. Because I say again, Mr. Minister, or through you, Madam Chair, that the unemployment rate is 18% in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality and rising. We're losing more jobs than we're getting, and I want to know how many of those 2,200 to 2,500 jobs you talked about as your target are going to be in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, and when?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, through you, I will say this, is that, and I'll spend a minute or so on Cape Breton. Through the credit union small business loan program, Madam Chair, we've invested, or I should say $1,255,000 has been invested in Nova Scotia. That's the credit union small business loan program. We also have in Nova Scotia, Madam Chair, is called CEDIF, the Community Economic Development Investment Funds. We also have the Strategic Cooperative Student Program, Madam Chair, which just, I think it was in November, I was at Mount St. Vincent and made an announcement that we were going to increase that fund. It's a fund that's we're now able to double the number of co-op students in the province of Nova Scotia, Madam Chair. We all know that the co-op student program was well received by those students that are enrolled in universities. We've invested in Cape Breton. There have been 6 investments that we've made in Cape Breton. There was Copal International, Halifax Biomedical, there was Polysteel Atlantic, There was North Air Window and Door. There was also, Madam Chair, Northside Processing, and there was TechLink, Madam Chair. And I think I heard this afternoon during question period, I think one of the responses to one of the ministers certainly involved TechLink that are on leading edge. So we have made significant investment in Cape Breton, Madam Chair. Will we continue to do that? Absolutely, Madam Chair. We want to see Cape Breton grow as well as we want to see every region, every jurisdiction in the province of Nova Scotia grow, Madam Chair. And that's part of our mandate. We will continue to do that. And through the efforts of those agencies and all of them that I've and those loan initiatives that I've mentioned, and those agencies, including NSBI, those companies that I just mentioned, those 6 companies that I just mentioned, were all clients of NSBI, Madam Chair. NSBI is doing. NSBI should be complimented on the work that they do for Nova Scotians, and they will again. They will continue to do their due diligence, work hard for the province of Nova Scotia and the people that live here, so that we can create better atmosphere, create more jobs, grow the economy, and have good, solid jobs here in the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Well, again, Madam Chair, that's a fine speech about the economy, and particularly when he zeroes in on Cape Breton. I might remind the minister, in case he doesn't know, he's getting figures from businesses that were already there before he took over. I'm talking about the future of 2,200 jobs in Nova Scotia, not what happened in the past. Some of those businesses he mentioned have been there for 10 years, and he's still trotting them out as an example of renewed economic development in Cape Breton, and there's only a handful of them. I want you to look forward, Mr. Minister, and tell me what your strategy is for the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. In terms of the call centres, Madam Chair, we have a huge bureaucracy bringing call centres to Nova Scotia, when in fact, I said it way back years ago now, that all you need to bring the call centres under the payroll system to Nova Scotia is a letter to them with a finance clerk and 1 executive. You don't need 75 people working on a call center that gives a payroll rebate. That's a financial thing you give, and you get on with doing the job. The problem is that we create these huge bureaucracies, and it's not manifesting itself in good, long-term, stable paying jobs on the ground. Now, the government, Madam Chair, can say whatever they want about moving forward with a target for jobs, but unless it happens soon in my area, there'll be nobody left down there to take the jobs, because the unemployment rate, it's projected to be over 20% in the next few months, when more call center jobs are lost in our area, and nothing is there to take its place. And Madam Chair, let me tell you that if it wasn't for the regional hospital jobs and the university jobs in Cape Breton and a smattering of call center jobs, we have no economy down there. We have no economy. Sure, in the future, there may be an economy if we can compete once we dredge Sydney Harbour for jobs in that regard. And the minister, it's funny, the minister never mentioned that. It must have slipped his mind, but I'll mention it for him. That, you know, Madam Chair, we're out to dredge Sydney Harbour, but those jobs, if they come, means that we have to develop, once the harbour is dredged, we have to develop a book of business for post-Panamax vehicles to come in and load and unload out of Sydney Harbour. And that's not going to happen tomorrow. We're talking at least 4, 5, 6 years away if we can get business that we expect will be there. I'm talking about what strategy does this government have to create new jobs in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality as we speak. Surely, Madam Chair, with the number of executives that are working over there, somebody is turning their attention to the fact that we have 18% unemployment in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, and very little is being done about it, at least publicly. If there is something being done about it, I'd like to know that, Mr. Minister.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know how to make this any clearer. That as we look to the future, and certainly part of the future, I mentioned 6 investments. And not only did I mention 6 investments, but I also mentioned, I talked about credit unions loan program, and I mentioned some other strategies. I talked about jobs here. And Madam Chair, yes, some of those companies have been around. But Madam Chair, the future is about sustaining what we got as well. So without those investments, we don't know, those companies, Madam Chair, came to us, and we were able to provide them with assistance, and because of our investment and our belief in them, they're still in business, and they'll be in business next year. We don't want to, what we have to do is one of the things that we are concerned about, Madam Chair, and the reason I mention those, it's about retention of jobs as well. So we've got to hold on to what we got. We've got to increase more job opportunities. So through the IEF, through the Jobs Here initiative, we are doing those kinds of things that we want to do by lowering the corporate tax for small businesses. All of these things add up so that we will enable companies in Cape Breton, companies in every region of the province of Nova Scotia to be in business, for them to move forward. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science, Madam Chair. Those are companies that have come to us seeking our investment in them, and we invested in them because we value those jobs. We value those jobs, Madam Speaker, and I keep hearing, Madam Chair, contact centers, call centers being mentioned. And Madam Chair, this government has not invested a whole lot of time in creating new jobs, in creating new call centers. What we have been fortunate, and it's through hard work and some good luck, Madam Chair, that we were able, and I can remember one case very vividly, where a call center in Hants County went out of business, and we were able, within weeks, replace that with another call center in the very same spot that the old one was. And that comes from hard work, due diligence, and Madam Speaker, I will say it comes with some luck as well. But sometimes in the world of economic and rural development and tourism, and I'm a believer that sometimes we create our own luck. And we create our own luck through, by that hard work, by having the NSBIs of the world, by having the IEF, by having the CDIFs, by having those credit union loan initiatives, by having that Jobs Here strategy, by having the RDAs, by having the by having the Cape Breton Partnership, by having them on board and working with us towards the good of the whole, Madam Chair. Without that kind of effort, without those kinds of initiatives, can you just imagine where we would be? Can you imagine where we would be today if we weren't investing in those kinds of initiatives, in sustaining those jobs or retaining those jobs, and training and offering education and training to employees of companies? You know, if we're not going to do that, Madam Chair, we might as well throw in the towel. What are we doing here? It's not rocket science. It's a little bit of common sense. But we have to, and we will continue to do those things to grow the economy in every region of the province of Nova Scotia, Madam Chair, and that, without a doubt, absolutely includes Cape Breton.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I hear the minister saying is that they're in the mode now of sustaining what they have in Cape Breton. Well, what they have is 18%, and what he's saying to me is, Madam Chair, that they're going to try and sustain the 18%. That's what I get out of that, because I don't I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to reduce the numbers anywhere down from 18%, but what I see is some predictions that are happening now that perhaps those numbers may go up. And again, he makes reference to the businesses that were brought to Cape Breton, and I remind you, Madam Speaker, that most, if not all of those businesses were brought to Cape Breton by previous governments, not this government. I was wanting to find out whether this government, this current NDP government in Nova Scotia, had a strategy or has a strategy for Cape Breton in the $2,500 job target that he talks about in the future. I want to know simply how many of those jobs that he's targeting for Nova Scotia are going to the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. What is the strategy, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, what is the strategy for industrial Cape Breton or Cape Breton Regional Municipality, or for that matter, all of Cape Breton, in those 2,500 jobs that were the figure that was chucked around here the other day? And surely, Madam Chair, with the number of executives that are over there at NSBI, the Industrial Expansion Fund, Economic Development, the RDAs, with the kinds of salaries we're paying them, the kinds of academic qualifications and business qualifications that they all have, surely somebody in that outfit can come up with something, in those outfits, they can come up with something that's going to provide some hope for the people of my area that the unemployment rate is going to go down and not continue to go up, because I can see the unemployment rate in the next few months going past 20%, and that is simply unacceptable in light of the fact that the Premier and the Finance Minister have said on a number of occasions that the economy looks good for Nova Scotia. Well, I'm sorry, but if 18% means it looks good and we're continuing to lose jobs, and all of those businesses that he talks about were in on government subsidies over the years, and I'm just wondering whether or not they're going to continue. How many call center jobs we're going to lose in the next few months and perhaps into next year. And all I'm asking, and the people of my area are asking, and the people of the member from Glace Bay are asking, you know, what does the future hold for us with this NDP government? What does the future hold in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality? Is there going to be a job for myself or my children or my grandchildren in Cape Breton in the future? Or are we continue going to give platitudes, Madam Chair, about we're creating 2,500 jobs in the future? The Premier and the Finance Minister say that the province is in good shape. The Economic Development Minister admitted today we're in a recession. So, you know, that's great news to hear from the Economic Development Minister in answer to my questions, that we're in a global recession and we're in a recession here in Nova Scotia. Well, somebody should tell the Premier and the Finance Minister that, because they're not talking about that when they're answering questions in question period, Madam Chair. They're talking about how great things are in Nova Scotia. Well, I'm sorry, they're not great in my area. And every time I've asked the Minister, Madam Chair, to answer a question directly about Cape Breton, he starts talking about the global economy in Nova Scotia. I'm here representing the residents of my area, and the member from Glace Bay is here doing likewise, representing our party and representing the interests of our people. And to date, we've seen very little, Madam Chair, about what's been happening in our area of Nova Scotia, the industrial Cape Breton area, and indeed all of Cape Breton, because very little is happening in the rest of Cape Breton as well. So again, I would ask, Madam Chair, if the Minister could tell me how many of those 2,500 jobs that he's projecting are coming to Cape Breton.
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to get on my feet again. Madam Chair, we've made significant investments in Cape Breton. Part of the investments we've made is laying the groundwork for the future. And I'm going to name some things, Madam Chair. And a good example would be, only one, I'll start with one, would be broadband. broadband, the internet for people all over Nova Scotia, including Cape Breton and Southwest Nova and everywhere. It's broadband the internet is a valuable tool especially for those home-based business. We've made a huge investment in that, Madam Chair. We've made a huge investment in the vicinity of $16 million, actually $16 million plus, which that in Cape Breton. You know what? I consider Seaside. Some of those companies that I mentioned previously, I think I mentioned 6. Part of that, and I mentioned retention, part of that is about retaining what we have in jobs, but also part of that investment is creating opportunities as well, Madam Chair. It's about creating opportunities, and there's and in some cases there might be up to 75 jobs created by investments. We've made a significant investment, Madam Chair, in the future of Cape Breton with Cape Breton Rail, which you know, again, that's significant investment, and that's about the future. And we know